And again, that gets close. Then lit up.
Good morning, Geshe Thabkhe, Tachi Dale. Happy Sakadawa. And good morning, Katrina. Thank you for your translation. I'd like to say something to Geshe-la.
Yeah.
Geshe-la, we'd like you to share in our joy. We've spent 4 days reciting the Prajnaparamita in 8,000 lines, and we dedicate this as our practice to you and for your good health and long life. Please rejoice.
Genla.
Yeah.
Konso ki chik shuya yores. Ta
Yeah.
nima shi gi ringla konso ge tongba inchi gi tola tun yores.
Ine.
Ani gewa di konso kirangi tse ringbo la ngoya yores. Ani sangye gi temba taryadan geba di la ngogi yores.
Ine. Kande sere yabuchila.
Yeah.
Konso ge tomba injina jurgere sere.
Tumbares. Kandun tun yores. Nima
Ine.
yeah. 아니 게와디 타치당 상게기 템바 게발라 ngogiores yang kerangi sering shuala ngogiores ketadi
Yeah. Gena did because they gave a year away because Suna Mambo Saso. No, she get ring like concert dumper done the day or the then they get sunam again the good say ring were you were shows.
So we have a few extra people here.
Oh yeah, we should
That's very good. Thank you. Yes.
So we have a few extra people here with us this morning for the class.
Mi tepa kashe yores, mi mangbo yore di ge tongba tumbala yongbarwa.
And so we'll begin with some prayers. You'll find the link for that in the chat box.
To the teacher endowed, transcendent destroyer, oneness God, full destroyer, completely and fully awakened one, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, one God of bliss, nor the world supreme guide of beings to be tamed. Teacher of gods and humans to you, the Buddha endowed, transcendent destroyer, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni, I prostrate, make offerings and go for refuge. When I was supreme among the humans, you were born on this earth, you faced 7 strides and said, I am supreme in this world. To you, more wise than I bow. With your body is formed supremely fine, wisdom motion like a golden mountain. Fame the places in the 3 worlds, winner the best, supreme guide, to you I bow. With the supreme sign, face like a spotless moon, color like gold, to you I bow. You are not connected, the 3 worlds are not incomparable, wise one, to you I bow. Great, compassionate protector, all-knowing teacher, field of merit and good qualities, vast as an ocean to the Tathagata I vow. Through purity, freeing from attachment, through virtue, freeing from the lower realms. Unique, supreme, ultimate reality, to the Dharma that is peace I vow. Having freedom of self, showing the path to freedom too, well established in the trainings. The holy field endowed with good qualities, to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame, a little lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew, a bubble. A dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through this merit may sentient beings attain the state of all seeing, subdue the 4 faults, and be delivered from the ocean of cyclic existence perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn Mount Meru, 4 lands, sun and moon, image imagined as a Buddha land and offered to you. May all beings enjoy this pure land. Venerable holy gurus, in the space of your truth body, from billowing clouds of your wisdom and love, let fall the rain of the profound and extensive Dharma, in whatever form is suitable for subduing sentient beings. Idam Guru Ramnamandalam Niryatayami. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
뭐야, 되셔라.
Dixon.
뭐야. 다들 거르시. 다 준주래 세션도. 대한 준주래 계속좀 붙이와래 손래로. 저네. 미 줄라 때네네. 동해 추우칠래주. 준디 치네 니가 왜 몸버도 순이 말로스. 시송 받아서. 나라저 단도 밀리톱 되게로. 아니 예송의 동해를 저시게 당 예송의 동해다 고해 동해도 겸존하시 봐 땡사보로와 탐해봐 데리얼바 빼찬 송거라 쟁가라저 다른 톱에 밀리디 주신다보지 주신다보 녀와이다 전를 깨대도 주신 요마라 그게 지혜가 말 삼로 코트에요 말에 로 전주를 실게이나 고해 동해당 예송 동해를 타려 탑지에 삼로 코트 마라 뒤에 가서라 미 줄라 때네네 소소 밀릴란데 밀린디 예송당 고해 동해를 저시기 주다부래 송거라 주신다케요 말에 현대 배잖아 저기 저거다 맨날 소치부시부시 감소치부시부시 디네 바안드야 될 뒤직마도 주신디 용기 매우시 로아 로라부치나 야다 가시나 찍마다 다 소소판 로고야나 섭소지 때대르마도 니쿠지 때마라 니쿠지 때네 주디쇼나니 쇼사르다 바타마라 때네시시거라 다당하라지 밀루톱 대바테 코아당 예송 그 동일의 주식이 주신다부레스 주다부레스거라 미 줄라 때네 동네 추우칠래 주스 예송기 동네 추우치고 땡다 탐해봐 대들 주식이 타와야 제 저도 그래 코에 동네 땡다 탐해봐라 들려 했잖아 아니 밀린 뒤에 때네 주신다부시네 저도 그래서 거라 미 줄라 때네 동네 추우칠래 주스 준디 치네 니가 왜 몸바도스 니말로스 밀린 데다시 코에 동네 다르게 주단다와 밀린 데다시 치순이 까오르다 선거라 준디 치네 니스가 마음바나 진짜 토야 가버려 다른 거라 답듯이 레네 껴나마데 깔래 짬네 다른 야부시 토라 너 토바데 동네 초글이야 저시 탑란 좋아치 오르마도 밀리 토바데 동네 초글 마드야 답시 주르잖아 아니 nenga chimbushirara 영원에 미게벨레라 맞은 것이 Any temperature boyora, milk, and to the Drumara. Don't do any that could take what Shimbu Saya Yomara. Kawasaya man at the question boy to do Shimbu Saya Yomara. Tangara's milk and it, take what Pelab Shimbu Saya Dewa. Mi Mambul Sasia, you are a Simja Mambul Sasia, Samba Marumba Mambukur, you are. Take what Pelab Shimbu Saya Dewa. Oh, Tienduko. Mi Kue Dongele Tarjik Chudabudi. Shad any Yama drag. Kamzu Tingle Ma drag. Done Shichi so will thought down the Shichi. Ma drusha selection Madisha. To the chin and Yako Momba say. Kuba ta Kuba Munera. To that Chunju in the North Nangazu Kuba is here, Miti Kuba Sager. Gungone to that Chunju no Shida Kuba Kemara. Shida Hale Yomara. That and that Ngone Kuba. Singing Sanga Kuba Tira. That's some time machine gets in and Kayomara. Some Lotan Shingi some Tong Togi so some Lutana Yora. Oh, they in the taste of such a resong. Me, Julatin and Netunga social letter. To the chin and Yako Mongba, to Sunyamalo. To the Tobe to Sunyamalo, subsociatinal. Tradition de Songora. Oh, yeah. The Pesha would Songora. Oh, this love.
So here, as the great master Shantideva has said in the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, this life of leisure that we have right now is like a great vessel or a great boat by which we are able to cross this ocean of suffering. And so here, as this is something difficult to find again, you fool, this is not time for sleep. So here, the kind of body that we have right now, the kind of life that we have right now is something that we can use to cross this ocean of suffering, the sufferings of the lower realms, avoiding being born as, say, an animal or in those kinds of circumstances as well. We have the ability to cross the ocean of all of samsara's sufferings. So here, if we were to be born in a situation where we're like an animal, for example, we don't have the ability to actually cross this ocean of suffering. So in the same way that if you needed to make a crossing over a great ocean, you would need to have the proper kind of a vessel to be able to make that journey of however long it might take, months or years. We shouldn't sort of take for granted the life that we have right now, but rather use it for a good purpose, right? To cross this kind of ocean of suffering. We have the ability to avoid a rebirth in the lower realms, experiencing the kinds of sufferings of animals or hungry ghosts or hell beings. And we have the ability, if we use this properly, to cross the ocean of all of samsara's suffering. And so here, this is something that we should, again, like if you have the proper vessel and are able to thereby transit from one place to a far distant location, we should use what we have, recognizing that this is something that is quite difficult to find in the future. It's not as though this is something that we can take for granted. We have in the past created the kind of causes that led us to take such a rebirth. It isn't like a rebirth as an animal, wherein you don't have the ability to think and understand. And even as an animal, although you don't necessarily incur great non-virtues, you're also not able to put much effort into virtuous actions. But the life that we have right now, the kind of situation as a human being, we have the ability both for great good as well as great bad. We see that there are those that are very malicious and violent toward others, the way that we can think improperly about others. We have the capacity to actually incur a great deal of non-virtue, but we also have the ability to do the kind of work that will help us to transgress or to cross this ocean of great suffering. And so here it's really, it says like sort of, you fool, you stupid one. I mean, we call people stupid when they make small mistakes, but wasting this life is not really a small mistake. This is a case where, yes, it really is stupid if you don't sort of wake up and use the situation that you have in order to make the kind of preparations for the future, ensuring that at the very least you gain another rebirth like this in the future. We have all of the kind of conditions, right? We have the ability to think and reflect and act in accordance comes with the Dharma. And so we should be careful, as it says again, this kind of life that we have right now is like a boat by which we are able to cross this vast ocean of suffering. But this is something that is difficult to find again in the future. So you fool, this is not the time for sleep, as in be careful, use what you have right now in order to make preparations for the future, in order to benefit yourself.
Oh yeah, the kasura. Ngarazu chöche sede. Nangba nashi chendro. Kyo ngama susu lü de chebu kyago yore. Sim de ko lü le ten de yusa ko samsal sim sebo chungbu yabu lando ha kongi. Samsal lü tu cha che tendre lü re sin lansona. Ene sim sebo yo ma lando ki ne meshin ki shdu yora. Tiende ko lü de chebu kyago yore. Kechi kin yurki yora. Yurwa chenbu chi yore. Lü gen yurki yore. Seme yurki yora. Oh, tiene karsora. Kyo ngama ne sim chik Toma mebane chi lenda mendra sani, kyohanda mendra lani te yuara. Maung bana tanda tu snesh tebe ina, kyohanda mendra lani rishre te yuara. O ti indu kar sura. Kyo ngama ya sa shebe le tindriki, ngima sa shebe le, kiwe paksa rab tindriki, sam liya. Ani ya jandul hata mili kiye kukabra yuara. Maung chewa te de nam yu maung nye song le kiye mato yu mara. Ngendru kia da kasi shema gora mambu yoyera. Ngara zo tendru li kia dengi so ma mesong li kia de pe sachi bitu na shi shara mangcha ma doke dosha yora. Ya kyalo cheche. No. Ta ngendru ne ya milu lan towe de sanje ki semyo kaan le ya tu shasen ki semyo shebe tu tabu shebe nyung shebe shebe songora. Chidang ye sonne ya yong ete nyong yong, maa dunga de begorwa, o te indi, tari pe sabzo chi kore se etandarwa, mii chule tene, ta tari ya doya ki kukab te rasorwa, ta maa doya kukab te ta soso sene sayra mato chige, ya doya kukab te yoriton, mii lula tene, kewa tu me shanla tsawa pang, che se de chiman dosa de ra nangbo chene, nga ma do chiman yigna chiman dosa de yagbo shi sogo yora. Majuti pechana yunguwa, jig sayade, chiwala jig sayade, nangba chuba chingina, shi tsaane tan rosadil shigi wara, yang kiawa chi langore, ta kiawa tukbu lana pe nyangare sam, rawa, tila shene kiawa sambu chi langore sam ki wara, shiye kuna shiye ki homa, koi chingira, tila kiawa di tuware sere, kiawa pe lo mambu kia dunga nyangura, chiwa de shida yirumbu ke wamari, tondu chili ta kalere chi uche maji chi tosti yorumado, shida ke mara shara. O tijiri di kashe che samlu mange zaga, ta mebe cha dhugu sam shigi wara, bakche ginchi basira. Nga mebe cha dhugu yisaru, mebe cha yomari, mebe cha nani tike yomarwa, kasere, kangbi baga shena shida, kake yomari si, dresa kake yomari si, mebe cha dhugu shena shida. No nangba chui samlu nal karishe urse mebe cha marda sigora. Mebe cha na che ke umara ni ushare pechi chikchide tikira koshira shira hale ke medwa. No tire kasura. O tinde yan do sada man do singine ke cheshu de ngara zo mi lure chi la lai lure la tene ya kone konde do ne ne kyo chimange sonle taro che koale taro che gura. Ti tondal shoshi wara, shoshade. O ti tonda ti yudi tutuni sendi la penge wara. Sendi tondal saya tonya koyen chido chochi wamara. Kyo chima di yabu yore tondal chochi wara. Ti yabu ji cheba yena mshela swapa pamba tu samba sambu cheba yena. Sosu sendi le kibri chiso le pamba ra ti shola de. Negab dewa penge de dasugura. Pusu nami se number member che sheshu de maomba yong ete rese, ti tanda chochi wara. No ti de kiwa chima yangya nge song le mando mugu ase. Sada mi kiwa chu chube ten kebar shen pa je tom yar dwe samlo shu shimbu tane sanje kowan bodan dwe samlo tangi yor tanga zitangu reda. Tarba toya terwa nge song tung ete yede pa ta che chen tentu ne tentu kyu. Rawa ane te tiang liya koya tung ele taye samlo 단다 삼로 단에 딘니가 체르다 대자 마인바 심제 탐제세 삼로 짧게네 봐 닝도 치부야 단제니 심제 탐제리아 팬바트 통계게 그것에 연대 군대지 가사진 거야 자꾸 왜 삼사 삼로 거고요라 어디든 다 쇼시요라 디질람이야
So here, when we talk about doing the Dharma, when we think about it, our body and our mind are constantly changing, right? We take up different bodies that act as the support of this mind, but there is a continuity to the mind, right? We go, it's changing moment to moment. Our body is also constantly changing moment to moment, but that mind will take up different bodies based upon the kinds of actions that we have committed in the past. And so here, the kind of actions that we have committed lead us to take a particular birth. And sometimes we have committed enough virtuous actions. We have these sorts of virtuous imprints that we then are able to do the Dharma, really do something positive within, say, a human life. We can work toward gaining a good rebirth again in the future, or striving for liberation or beyond that. But when we look at the number of beings that go from sort of miserable states of existence to miserable states of existence, those bad rebirths, that is quite prevalent. Most beings, we don't even need to really talk about that. It's like the number of particles that there are on the earth. Whereas those that go from a bad rebirth into a good rebirth are almost like the number of particles underneath a fingernail. So it's extremely difficult for us to go from that kind of state of a lower existence into some better kind of state. And so we need to recognize the sort of opportunity that we have. The opportunity to go downward is always there, but it's really something where we need to take advantage of the future, of the situation that we have in terms of ensuring that we have a good future, gaining another rebirth as a human or a god. And so we need to make sure that where we go in the future is good. When we talk about sort of the fear of death, in Buddhism, it's not just about that act of dying. That's a natural kind of a thing, and it's actually quite short. But rather, it is a fear of where will we go in the future? What kind of rebirth will we take based upon the actions that we have done? And so when we talk about having a fear of death, it's really what comes after death, because again, the process of dying is something that is quite natural. And it's not really, when we think about the sort of suffering, aging involves much more suffering and torment, right? That goes over a long period of time, and we have to experience all kinds of different suffering. Whereas when it comes to being afraid of death, in a Buddhist context, that's thinking about, well, where am I going to be reborn in the future? Have I ensured that I'm going to get a good rebirth? Now, some people might fear death out of a kind of nihilistic view, that they are going to become non-existent after they die. It's sort of like the view of the hedonists, wherein once you die, you're nothing, and there's therefore you should just sort of do whatever. But it's not the case that we will become non-existent, right? There is a continuity to our mind. We are going to continue going up and down and so forth based upon the kind of actions that we have committed. So if we are to engage in abandoning the 10 non-virtues, making an effort toward virtuous actions, we can ensure that we gain a good rebirth again in the future. And so we don't do the Dharma really for the affairs of this life, to be able to have food and clothing and reputation and so forth, but those are kind of temporary benefits that come from doing the Dharma. We will have those sorts of positive effects that come from doing the Dharma, but the real ripening results are coming in our future lives. So the most important thing that we can do is be thinking about that future and ensuring that we are able to have a good rebirth as a human or a god, in order to continue to pursue higher goals, and in order to continue to increase our desire for liberation and the kind of efforts that we are making towards that, or even beyond that, increase the mind of thinking about other sentient beings, striving for a state of Buddhahood in which you have eliminated all faults and developed all good qualities and have the ability to fully benefit other sentient beings. And so really here we need to think about what we are doing now, because of the future is dependent upon the kind of actions that we engage in at the present. And really our thinking about death is thinking about, well, what will come after, and what am I doing in order to make preparations such that I can ensure at the very least I have a good rebirth and am able to continue striving for those goals of liberation and the state of Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. The Dharma is about the future, even though it brings good results in the present as well.
Oh yeah. Oh, the indico chede so do shana. Ni shala choa pamba da pemba truba ni na do so gudwa. Ti ngone tande te ora. Chamba da sewa na do dura. Oh, sewa se de shala neba me se sam. Tunge sule tunge chone de mare sam je. Shala choa pa de ngora. Oh, shala pemba truba so de shala tewa da trena sam. Suina tewa de ba de se ya ga chuna sam. Tewa da trede sam te ngora. Tinile shichene ni yongyo sama tabde shiro sama chanju semine da nyiji shembu ine da yinde ye dongbanye komeye da midabo komeye da tezo titandara dongbanye komeye de chagdan koran de yabure meduse zawa koran ba je tandara chagdan luwange ne kyante kanga yongdo sam tende je paye tandalya dongbanye komeye da midabo komeye da tezo kanga yongora ti sama teni na tepshire kyachero cher tangora Shela Tsawa Paya de Kasher Shirt and never Paya Tera, Pemba to the Kasher Shirtan, and the Achusi or Atelia, or the Ducasura. So similar, the Ludang Ave, Sawa de Lumani Gona Yungura. Sim de Samlutan, the Sim de Tora Dora. Sim de Samlu member course and Lumani de Carches and the Tichura, get it to Jashes and to Jashes, Shoes and a sugar, member Carches and a Lumani de Semi Condasira. Ti indiko linga kone shala tsawa yungur, ti nani tambu semde yabuji sebe yine, sangbu sebe yine, chamsida dembe sebe yine, linga ala juwa dodo bari te wara. O ti indi nangbe chwe de, jidang chwe li yan ramida kashi yore zira, zoo che yare diri da. Kashi pa mi ki tasa le kunlong kunju ki tone chwe zoo che yare zira. Kali jabe da sobu chi ti che ya da, namju ten ya da, sobul kali te ya da, chik tindi zoorab che che yore zira chwe, ra. Kashi ya ngane chin dene ya, shenda le jamju shu chi chi chiro mama chiro chi che, peti soa ma tab che, ke gyab che, tindi che che yore zira, zoorade. Kashi de sembi samlo dane, semle gyurju dane, ene lunga chubani de gyurju dane ke che yore zira. Tindi nangbe che de tidu jagali de ko chul, damina mabu yu chowra, kashi le chige pembor, kashi te pembengura, kanga chikpa yungmara, kansa so lota chamba lo, ningdub chi chungta, shirab chi chungta, tindil teni yungura, o tindi ko kashi. Nangbe che de zo semle ya gyurju dane de yi jere. Semle gyu, kawa yin jere. Wambu nombu gu ta samlu tane, tane yubari shi yore. Ko kachimbu samlu tane gu yora, loli chibachi gu yora, tambu semle gyurju dane de. O ti tani lungani de gyurju dodo yora. O ti indi ta ti shana, namju sanji nga zu sungu toa. O karsara. Tikwachi ya mecha she kewa pusun sobar chaas. Tegre, chamchengi digu toa. Tikwachi di tsawa yungu yora. Kewa pusun sobar chidi shan pendo chugu yora. Ranga semni yonsun diyo se. Dida sanji tenpa. Sanji chumden digi chu tenya tunda ti yin se ura. Sem nyamba digi pengolo chigira. Anga namju ni she tegi yuwa. Junju nal nga zu yuwa. Ishin dongde semla chaasa lo se. Soso semgi yabu chebe ne soso da changma yabu sugda. One semde sanji ri yu se de semde ra. Semde yar tane turnu echi pe yabu shuji wara. Ewa tindu kausara. Ishin dongde semla chaasa lo se. Soso semla chaasa kawa kumgi wara. Duwa chi chena. Eni tupshin di sumbu pesena yungudwa. Ewa. Ishin dongde semla chaasa lo se. Mara chunju nala dira kasara. Sem nashingi jikden dina semle jikwa shenga mis. Shina chishu jisa de semle re sungwara. Shenda mara, sunja da tezu mara, tezu ke mara, ko gyu yung marwa, mi sem tera. The comes from the assembly jig by Shanghai Mess Julia. Oh, Jenny, I think not to Pecha Bambunayati Yokudwa. Ishi no de similar charts loss. So some day Ishin Nobu Soso do the Sama, Troop Chungade, some de Resha, some the Soso, some social chart. Oh, Jane Duzaka Soda. Tao Semia, so and Namjune, Soso. Chöge chilam juma juice, Sanje chilam juma juice. Ro lame chilam juma juice, chick she did similar thoughts and you under with on that, chilam juva. Similar you under woman, Sanje stone says churkas in Yana, chöge chilam juva mare. Chöge pando yo mare. Don't do it tar, Naka yore. Tar, that's a Lamnan to coach shoulder. What it under at the end of what you teaching.
So, if we really summarize the Dharma, it can be summarized into these 2 points of do no harm and benefit others. This is really encompassed in compassion and love. The mind of compassion meaning may others be free from suffering, and then love being may they be endowed with happiness. And this is really the kind of foundation of all of the practices. Everything that we do in terms of thinking about love and compassion, or bodhicitta, the method side, as well as the wisdom side, studying things like emptiness and impermanence, they are all really to expand upon those 2 basic points of do no harm and benefit others. I mean, we study emptiness, we try to realize emptiness in order to get rid of our attachment and aversion from the root, the source of our harming others, and being able to benefit others. So really, we take as the foundation non-harm and the wish to benefit and expand and increase them more and more. And so our harm generally to others comes more directly from the actions of our body and our speech, but those in turn are driven by our mind. And so within Buddhism, the mind is the main thing. If we make our mind good, if we make our mind kind, then our body and speech will follow after that. We see that in other traditions, there's some traditions in which there's a focus on doing like austerities of the body, things like fasting or particular kinds of bodily activities, or there are others in which really one's speech is seen as primary, like reciting certain things again and again and again. And then there are some traditions that are really about the mind and trying to improve and develop the mind. And so we see, like, for example, in India, there are many different types of religion, and they are taught in order to accord with the various dispositions and capacities of various sentient beings. But really, when we think about the kind of presentation within Buddhism, it is that the mind is principle. The actions of our body and speech will follow after the mind. And so we need to really work on improving our mind through developing and expanding non-harm and the wish to benefit. And so when we do non-virtue, we are creating harm to others. When we do virtuous actions, we are bringing about benefit. As it is said in the verse that we recite at the beginning, that do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions, subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. And really that essentializes, encompasses all of the principles of Buddhism within that simple verse, that when we do non-virtuous actions, we are creating suffering, harm for others. So we should avoid any of that. And we should do only what is beneficial. And we do this really through subduing our mind. That is the principal teaching of the Buddha. And so there are scriptures in which it is said, like, I bow to this mind of mine that is like a wish-fulfilling jewel. It's really something that is amazing, incredible. We have this capacity to be able to develop our mind such that we can benefit and avoid harming others. And so too, as Shantideva has said in his Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, there's nothing in these 3 realms as scary as our own mind, as much fear-inducing as our own mind. When we think about it, it's not like weapons or other things that we should really fear. It is the mind that creates all of those. And so it is the case that all of our desired aims are accomplished through working with our mind. And it is true as well that we create our greatest sufferings through not having control over our mind, through letting our mind sort of do whatever it wants. And so here, the mind is principle. The mind is the main thing. And it really is, when we talk about, say, like receiving the blessings of the Buddha or blessings blessings from a teacher, if our mind is transformed, then that is really receiving those blessings. If our mind is transformed for the better, then we are able to say that we have received those blessings. And that is really where the benefit of the Dharma comes. If we listen to a lot of Dharma and it just hardens our mind, it keeps it from being transformed, then there's no benefit that comes from the Dharma. So recognizing that, again, the Buddha's teachings can be essentialized into these 2 points of non-harm and benefiting others, and that the mind is principle, that really improving, developing our mind is the main point. The Dharma is in order to do that. And we have received the blessings of the Dharma if we are able to create that kind of transformation in our mind.
Oh yeah, but they in this they karsada. Kasa taking anjo. Mi chula tene ne tunge shu chile sorwa. Indi tanjo tare mili di toba tirwa. Ani kyawa chima nyawa yeda tondula meke kyawa lada mi chutu beten kebar chike tondalia. Ani kariche uresana. Lunga yisum yikone migi wa chupa etira. Migi wa chuti pa ten dokso. So che de pa so kyobe tepsi che ra. O dinashi Machimba lemba pa chimba tae so roba che shanda yune pa te che. O de mege wa chuti pa ke wa chutu be chudi nga ju che ne che tobe ta. Ti nam ju ke je shedi ta chizo na du ti kanga yungura. Kane ke je shedi sa mege wa yungdo yungmu ta. Lunga cheba le yungdo yungmu ta. Sem ji samlo le a ti ne napse jende yungdo yungmu ta ya da. Ti chipshare tangi chikene ni nyoru re. Chipsha madan ja hako sako se shasane ko dra ke yo mara shida had ko de ya ko de mado dependo ke yo mara chipsha tangi chigara chera ngeson ko tunge ka ne la da mili ke tapsi ding an go stand che to ye da musumra kyo thoma me bane sa be ti bol pa ge ba che sha pa chera e chendelia lunga yesongi mi ke wa chutile tona che ti pa na ne ti la da mili ke ko tha chu sara Tikbudi taye yosan ko shakwa chesan taa dhurwa. Ani kiawa chutila komza ko kiawe samluti shuk chayra chungura. Mati indi ani chiga lamula tesu samluti za korche ko lada miliki susu lakwa yuwe suri chidwa. Dire. Ta tili lakwa che kibun tingra china. O ti kyang chigma samta. Lada mi tungeji rashi mambu yora. Nyesungla tyote yabu shida rede, tenru rede. Ina chidan ko tunge shida yora. Keganashile sopachi, deva toto me deva toto babu samambuyara, or the shemoche. O di Tezule tarwachi chekudu sam. Tezuke jude caresina, and in tiro Yamogu on the lesa etera. Lesa, control down like it, down trato, down dance villa soba, Numo, Tina de Shenchachi said. Shenchachi, Benanga, something as it. Nambachena. Nga samsa tambu de nga le shenja chesho yora. Soso de rawa de shibi samlo ko yora. Rawa de samlo ko ne soso ya. Nga zindi shuk chambu shibi che shenja shuk chambu yora. Ti yede ane nga lu sera, ane nga nangmi se, nga miri se, nga chulu sera, kanga yungu yora. Sa ko shenja cheso daga de shenja mewa chena. Ane kondo de yungu marwa. Shenja chi yosan ko kondo yungu yora. Chili shenja chi Pajo de mitumba chesa ane kondo yungu yora. Kipa mewa soya tandalia. Shenja, seba sigra, seba docha, shenja. Ngobo kanga, pecho che kala saya kore, tunye kore, chi kanga kode kore wa lu soya tandalia. Choa zamji ten re mato shiki, shebo che pa, soso mendaya che shebo te shenja, kanzi shuk chenpo yora, tegin tegyo mara. Chitan ko yanyi te teto yunguru wako. Me inam didi merin didi meng dili peng marse didi yora. Di trachu batu zule yungu yora. Zako peni di sam mato chiki shebo je. Nga razu samlina tinde yora. Sindi pencho do china chik shebo sa chik. Pachi takwar singam do kisi drive samlo sora chikogira. O tindi kasura. Shinja shuk chimbu di mewa suna. Ene kondo de yaya yomare. Shinja te mena. Nga shinja te luko nge sambe tena shi chigme du sampoje de kondo sayachi yora. Di yungu yomare chundu ora. Chagdangi di nyori chini chagdang wange le saya de kewa da mige le saya de mewa chadu ora. Di indi ane 가서라 코 소소리 라메바 풍분 돌린 제고 버들 타도도 기분 등 삼령도 다디 바 야케체 소소 장자 말에 삼로 소소 직부인데 타야 삼로도 야고데 메두사 단단가서 삼로 코토요 마라 즉 코아 동에기나 저 토마 메바네 저 단다시 마오바나도 땡게 삼로 타보 타게시네 소메도 그러죠 그거라 다 소소난신 소소 파마다 녀니 데스 고조 삼로 타나네 삼로 코토요라 뒤에도 semje 상모 탐제 소소 바다 마다 녀다 녀도 마주바 겨나마 나서 마주바 매 디펜토레 디펜메도레세 겨나시 남의 디두데 소소 디두 쓰기와라 치마용에도 소소 디두 쓰기와라 디시데서 아니고 차단매 semje 강가가 섬도고 semje 탐제 동에대 저와치 등거시 고도 삼사게 삼로제 기부침배 삼로고도 인데 뒤에도 심지어 탐지에 때가 두던 게 견군세 연대 군대기 산지지 고반 토바차기 삼자 미유 타는 무시비샤 네버도 타체 소소 삼릉원에 타체라 진짜 지기 대체도 당에 단단에 가르송도 산지 가르송도라 실 태바체 삼로다 강안연이 단단한 고추 통계도 좀 고추 마음바나 제토에도 반생에 네버도 두기인 삼 디던달 추년기 삼사 삼라타나 아니 추년에 빼게 올랍 전부 두라 팀에도 다테 토스 대고 삼니 가르시든 지시그리삼 투스테샤나 코케 올랍 전부 주고 말와 여기 랍 전부 주에도 소소 삼라타 저 켜고도 어디에 꿀 야부시 세담네 셈바시오시 어디 되지라
So here again, as Shantideva says, right now, this life that we have is like this great vessel by which we are able to cross this ocean of suffering. And so here, really on the basis of this body, this life, we are able to abandon the 10 non-virtues and engage in their opposites in order to ensure that we have a good rebirth as a human or a god in the future. This is something that we can do. We are able to do. We are able to abandon killing and do the opposite of protecting life, abandon stealing and do the opposite of being generous, and so forth. And this is something that we have the capacity to do, but really is about actually doing it. When we go out in society, we speak and we interact with others, that is when we really need to practice. We need to take account of our actions. What are we saying? What are we doing? What is our mind thinking? Are we malicious? Are we having jealousy or covetousness? We need to have a kind of accounting of that. If we think like, oh, I know the Dharma, and just walk around like that, we don't actually end up practicing. If we don't actually take account of what we are doing with our body, speech, and mind, then there's no way that we can begin to transform that and actually improve that. And so in addition, taking the time to purify, confess, and purify those negative actions that we have accumulated in the past, if we do this, if we're paying attention to the actions that we are doing now, and we engage in the process of confession, then through that we can purify those non-virtues that we have done in the past. It is possible through that kind of practice. And when we really engage in this, it's definite that we will gain a good rebirth as a human or a god. This is something that we can be assured of. But even if we are to get a rebirth as a human or a god, we all know the kinds of sufferings that we still experience, recognizing that even such a rebirth is not beyond the nature of suffering. We have to experience birth, aging, sickness, and death. We have to experience encountering what we don't want to, not getting what we want, and so forth. We all can recognize that. And so when we see that even such a good rebirth, although it's better than the lower realms, it's not beyond this nature of suffering, well then if we ask, well, what is the cause of this? What creates this kind of cycle of repeated rebirth in this suffering situation? Well, it's karma driven by our various afflictions. And really primary among those is the sense of an I, this kind of attachment that we have toward an I. And when we have a strong clinging to the I, we then think like, oh, well, my body, my possessions, my people, my race, my religion, and in turn have aversion toward who we see as other. And if we could get rid of that kind of clinging, that sort of bias towards this I, then we would get rid of the kind of aversion and hatred that we have toward others. So here, if we are able to eliminate, particularly that sort of clinging to an I, right? And all the things that that I wants. I mean, we need to take care of our body. This is the basis upon which we can do the Dharma, but we can benefit it. We can do things like sustain ourselves without having such strong clinging, right? We need to have food. We need to have clothing. We need to have some level of wealth. But we see that some get so caught up in this, like they are accumulating so much wealth, thinking that somehow they can carry that with them, or somehow that they are going to be able to keep that. And that's not the nature of things. So if we are able to eliminate karma by eliminating the kind of afflictions that drive that, then we can be freed from this cycle of taking up aggregates and casting them off under the control of our karma and afflictions. And that then is the kind of second level of thinking. But when we reflect that it's not just us, we aren't the only one who is in this kind of situation, but rather if we look around, all of the beings that we care about, our mothers, our father, our friends, our family, if we really begin to contemplate the kind of situation that we are in, it's unbearable. And when we extrapolate that to others, and we recognize that really others have been like our mothers, our fathers, our friends, our loved ones, and it's a matter of we just don't recognize it. I mean, we see the suffering that we have experienced in the past, the suffering or happiness of our past, as being our suffering or happiness, right? And so too, what we will experience again in the future in terms of happiness and suffering, we see as our happiness and suffering. And so when we think about it, all of those beings that, although we have changed lives, they have acted toward us with great kindness in the past and will do so again in the future. And so when we think about that, we wish to be able to benefit them and extract them from this situation of samsara as well. And so thinking, may I myself become a being, become a Buddha who has eliminated all faults and developed all good qualities. We set that as like a goal for the future, a long time for the future. And right now, although we might not be able to practice all of the kind of causes that will lead to that, we are listening to the Buddha Dharma in order to be able to strive for that goal, beginning with ensuring that we have a good rebirth in the future and continuing to strive toward that state of Buddhahood. If we have this kind of attitude wherein we really take as a foundation abandoning the 10 non-virtues, engaging in the 10 virtues, and purifying our negativities, then we can definitely get a good rebirth. And if we have set as our final kind of goal that state of Buddhahood, whatever virtue we engage in, like listening to the Dharma, becomes something that is really powerful based upon our thoughts. If we're just listening to this thinking like, oh, I'm going to learn something, or this might be beneficial for this life, that's much less powerful than if we have this kind of long-term vision of, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings, and setting that as however far it might take to get there, I'm going to listen to the Dharma in order to be able to proceed toward that state, then this will become really powerful. So please set a good motivation for listening to the teachings.
Oh, yeah. Oh, 당한 주대 참지 될래 돼요 봐. Oh, 쇼로가 가데레. 납중 앞된데 봐.
No.
뭐야 납중 앞돼. 다 단데 될 가르셔도 쓰나. 이 넘버 쉐바데 랑신지 요레스로. 이바데 남시 랑신지 요레스. 여데테 유 수데티로레 잘라서 와 랑신지 투바 요레스. 디세요라. 디파 가스데레도. 넘버 쉐바데 랑신지 투바 치요레스 랑원에 투바. 가르데 유 수다 테로레 잘라서 와. 대주 강가 랑신지 투바도 와스. 디시에도. 여기 안에 내 가르쳐도 쓰나. malo sentimiento. Chita migni chubaye, game kolo, zinji bangire, yuchibare, zinji bas. Tishin, wombo namjene, tade yuda, zimbarchese, rawa. Kasido sa chita migni chubaye, mishidi, miwadi, liyako, chikot yako, game kolo side, 매럽지 저한테 타바견도 수요션에 고고 고견 통그라 뼈라지는 일에 숙십이전에 고고리스던 것도 고고도 요 말하고 게메 콜로스기도 하til이야 지다 미니 튜버에 게메 콜로 진지 바세 그 방지 교과 제산에 고고 통으로 뭐도 새 고고 요 말로 그 집마도 요 말로 영에 요 말로 뒤는 교다 쉬는 미화되다 아니 이 주변 왕기 고고 진짜 통구요로 뭐도 전다 요 말에서 와라 전리 요 말에서 지다 미니 주변에 개미 콜론 진지 봐서 대신 원본 남견에 아니 다들 유단 좀 봐줘 다른 하시 대신 원본 남견 매개 원본을 차례 그 유수 자제로를 잘라 소바 여다다 쳐라 소바 대주시오라 대신 원본 남기 유수 미와 나와 지와 리와 이와 도줄이야 차례 그 유수 자제로를 잘 쳐라 소바 어떠시 용거라 아니 대신 원본 남기 때 원본 남기네 대대 유단 좀 받지 원본을 지잘 엔텔 때네네 시바가 진짜 좀 받지 요래 시거라 디고 삼번나시 삼마 남주나시 삼마 예병이 봐요 말에 시거라 나에 들고 랑문에 두번 남기 유나야 로이 소우타 티로를 잘라서 봐 예동하다 매원을 써봐 근데 코랑 코랑 뭐네 라와도 이거를 좀 거라 어디 단단하죠 차단기서 유조데 당진디 시고라 쇼탐제 랑기 당니 랑기 뭐요 받죠 봐 티바 매버스고라 티 매버스는 착배 유디 매버셔고라 착배 유디 매나네 당에 유디 소소용을 매버셔고라 어디인데 차단경에 레사버데 매르 차단고 레사버 매나네 고고마로 어디 시고라 다시 좀 버시 지다 미니 튜바에 게메 콜로 짐버치바 대신 시라 원부 남기니 다대 유다 짐버치바 인게세 원부다 유다 넘버시바랑 신지 주바 메데세 유에랑 신지 주바 요마리 유제랑 신지 주바 요마레세 다땅마된 되데 남시랑 신지 주바 유데 유 수지 미시랑 신지 주바 유데 수디랑 신지 베치세라 고요라 어디 유대랑 신지 요마레 유제 코라랑 신지 요마레세 거라 랑신기 요스다마랑 전에 코랑 코랑 랑신기 현다다 직 떠는 될마도 그거 매버진데 많이 봐 코랑 어디 랑신기 수여버리 삼고 요라 랑은에서기도 랑은에 랑신기세 그 코랑 은에 나라주 삼부터는 고대하잖아 근데 소소 삼부터는 나라가 예성도 딩에 소부터 딩에 류리 뛰지사 그냥 가다가 나라가 찍로서야 예배 삼고도 소보다 소하다 셈다 대줄에 땡진 될네 나한테 샤고베 나의 뭐 죽고베 삼을 고우면도 고라랑 신기해 봐지 어디를 랑 신기해 봐 랑은에 봐 랑게 뭐예요 봐 자, 아주 나오는 시 수수 통하는 시 템버리요 봐 템버리요 봐 나라도 통하는 시 돌리하고 제제네 지 유대버지 근데 삼을 고다 어떨 때는 신자다 공부다 강하게 와라. 그 매버서야 된다래 유고라 삼루 땅사가 유고란데 남중간주 삼루 땅 나시 말해서 와라. 로 단저시는 아주 막아서네 꼭 유고랑은에 메가르지 통기 와라. 정신기 수수심기 봐 딱이 어디 삼루 고기 오마라. 근데 밑에 편에 레벨이네 그 당부 뭐 마시네 계산 말고 정신기 이도 뭐하지네 그 편에 통하다가 공도 사고 그랬대 사고도 수레 삼도 어보레도 가슴도 다 그런 거 지지지서 신의 공도 사고도 심지바 따는 것도 공도 사로 지문도 그 랑은에 이도 뭐하지네 그 심비 삼lum하고 그렇지 그 통화 잠비 공도 사야다 신샤게다 되요 그랬대요 말아 이 매버도 수수성기 봐 따고도 이도 와다 매워다 야구 싶지도서 독자 싶지도서 소성기 밤마다나 유코랑 왜내 연하니 섬지 상로마다나 그 통잠비 다가라 여고라티 용교 말아 어디에 실업님 비급신구도 최탐자랑 신께 동반한 바양다 바치서 따오스 아니 소매 담에 팀에서도 섬매 메세데 당부 메세상 고대 가르도 따고라 기마데베제네 소매 담에 따 수요 말에 소매 담에 선도 산제 선도 왔는데 말이라 여고 가서라 최탐자 랑신기 동반한 바양다 바치서 아니 소매 담에 팀에 로메를 점에서도 실제기 되었습니다. 대한 직대기 탄예기 왕기 인기에서 전담반에 많이 넣어서 덕심망부시 고란 마인게 덕심망부시 텔 때는 직대기 네 지지르다 네 마마르 네 캄바르다 네 모터르다 네 컴퓨터르다서 뮤리르 따샤라 대왕기 샤고를 마도시 그나 이 그나 면에 나는 디세쿠스 밍 디세쿠스 요 말아 징아주 그냥 매드지 사시색 버리시러 그래 담분 왜 민대지 메스다셔라 매마다 이제 추스라샤이나 담부대 다저 추스라 되게 요마라 매들이 추스라샤 다저 추통세지래 이거 매트셔야 그 당연히 가르치네 되게서라 민당부 단계대 그런 가르삼나 똑바로 가르삼나 직다셔라 현대다 가가 문제 제했던다 따위어라 생겨 말아 이제 당연히 왕게 샤고서라 지dengi tanya je wang shagwa kura pege yoba de dakshi de khasha shi che en telpa mingji ta shara ye choba la tenjin derne ene ko tanya la ten dakshi la tenjin derne ene ngobo de shagwa ma da yu kuna ngune chi ge rangune rangshin ge rang ngoyo tumna kadu ine lo ta ta la ma de be kura ngune kadu ine tinde sam ko to ba shi ko yara o ti shegari ya ti sona yendigde.
So here, then picking up in the text, we're going to be picking up with verse 357. And so here, this is refuting the inherent existence of various objects, as well as the kind of faculties and the consciousnesses that perceive those objects. So here it says the sense faculty, the eye erroneously apprehends the circle formed by a torch being whirled around. Likewise, the sense faculties apprehend objects as if they were in the present. So here, when we have for example, a firebrand or some sort of torch that is being whirled around, or if you had a stick of incense, something that was burning and you're moving it quickly around, it appears as though there is like a circle of fire or a circle of light. And so here, one can recognize that the eye faculty, something appears to the eye faculty. It appears as though it's existent in this way, but it doesn't actually exist as it appears. So in the same way that like our eye, the eye consciousness is deceived with respect to there being a kind of fire that is being whirled around. So too, when it comes to the kind of sense powers, they apprehend their objects, really the consciousnesses apprehend their object as if they were really existent, like existent from their own side, when they don't in fact exist in that way. In the same way that likewise the sense faculties apprehend objects as if they were in the present, right? When we think about like a stick of incense or a firebrand being whirled around, it's not as though that actually is a perceiving the present object, but it's a series of moments that is being mistakenly apprehended as like a circle. And so too, when an object appears to our sense faculty, it appears as though it's existent from its own side, as if it has this kind of like objective existence in and of itself that's not dependent or contingent upon anything else. So when we think about like the objects that we see as pleasurable or the objects towards which we feel aversion, it seems as though they exist as that in and of themselves from their own side. But when we come to realize that actually they don't exist in that way, we stop creating the kind of karma with relation to the afflictions that arise towards those things that we find pleasurable or that we have aversion toward. So both the objects of our sense faculties and consciousnesses, as well as the subject, lack any sort of inherent existence. And so here, when we talk about inherently existent, that is something existing like from its own side, objectively, without depending upon anything else. Like we have this sense of there being an I or a self, right? That is somehow like existent in and of its own right. We think like, well, I'm really here. I don't depend upon other things. And then I have my body body and my form and my feelings and so forth. But really, when we talk about something having that kind of inherent existence or objective existence, we could call this true existence or ultimate existence. This is the way that it appears to our various faculties, but when we actually examine, we can see that it doesn't exist in that way. By eliminating that kind of perception or that grasping at things as having that kind of true or inherent existence, we then are able to eliminate the kind of afflictions that arise based upon that, as well as the karma that then we create driven by those. And so this is the reason why we are looking into the way that phenomena actually exist. Like if we have someone that we find unpleasant, that is our enemy, say, we think that they exist from their own side as our enemy, right? And if it were really the case that that person were unpleasant from their own side, objectively, truly, without depending upon anything else, then even before we sort of met them or knew them, we should have that kind of sense arise. Just by seeing them, we should feel like this kind of aversion, right? But someone isn't our enemy until they have done something, until our sort of thinking gets involved and we designate, oh, that person is my enemy, I don't like them. It's not as though upon first seeing someone without even knowing them, we give rise to that kind of hatred or aversion. It isn't the case that without thinking, we are able to really have that kind of feeling. If they were inherently unpleasant, inherently or truly existent as such, then just upon seeing them, we should give rise to that kind of aversion toward them. But that's not the case. We know this from experience. And so here, when we see that, as it says, like in the Heart Sutra, that we should see perfectly that even the 5 aggregates are empty of inherent existence. And then it goes into there's no form, no sound, no taste, no touch. It's not that they don't exist at all, but they don't exist inherently. And so too, in other of the Perfection of Wisdom sutras, it talks about how all phenomena are existent by convention, not ultimately, not intrinsically, not in their own right. And so, for example, we say that fire is that which has the characteristic of being hot and burning, but really that is just a name, a label that has been designated upon a collection of various parts that are not that thing. If we were to choose a different name, like from the beginning, we could call that thing which is hot and burning, we could call it water, right? It's just merely a label that we have designated. When it comes to all phenomena, they are merely designated by convention, as in we give a label or a name to a collection of parts, a basis of designation that is not that thing itself. So we can talk about there being a house or a computer or a person or this or that, but it's not as though they exist in and of themselves inherently without the process of our designating them through the means of conventions. And so here, when we are getting into this verse, talking about the way in which both the objects of our sense faculties as well as the sense faculties are not inherently existent, it is in this way that we should come to understand it, and as well as understanding the purpose for realizing this.
Oh yeah. That's some said it. Wamburang Shinji Truba Kawashikdo, Tamatin Mai. Wamburang Shinji Truba Kawatilla, Tansen Sumkuna Kagdwa. Then Juarang Shinji Truba, Juarang Shinji Truba Kakbe, Wande Rangshinji Truba Kakwatira, Juakura Rangshinji Tukumari, Tesondani, Miwanda, and a Sugla Soba Tizukanga, Wambusi Miwana Chanta Sura. Then said they use Sutra to Reshalis Wasiwara. Wambuda Tende Ranshi Tuba Yongmaris or Juan Kuran Rashi Mana, Wambuda Tende Ranshi Tuba Yongmaris, Tambutse. Ne Juan Ranshi Tuba Kakwase, Juan Ranshi Tuba Yongmaris, Nibachera. Tene Su Ranshi Tuba, Su Ranshi Matuba, Tesonda Su Ranshi Tuba Maris, Tensum Duata, Tambutera. Wandu Ranshi Tuba Yudesta, Nobu Ranshi Yuba Kelling get to the Kusenko Yara. Wombo da tense, Miwana Chamata, Sudati Reshala Sofa. Wombo da, Wombo yu Sudati Reshala Sofa, to the Ranshingi Yade Sora. Wondu Ranshingi Yude, te Gunjua Yubichers, Juan Ranshingi Yubichers. Wombo da ten to Kanga, Sudati Ro Reshasana, ko tere te wara, tudu tubare te wara, o tende mwa na wa chi wa to so, tudu tubare te wara, o to so se. Ombo da ten, ombo nga da ten nga bu de rang shin ji tuba yue de, te kyu juwa yue be che, te kyu sa chu me long ku juwa le tene tukura, sa chu me long la so ba, te zu juwa su chua ne, juwa tu zu jawa che ne ne tuku yara, ombo da ten da, te so. Chu kyu sen kukudwa. Tadile pa ti chi ya. Ombo nam da ten nam se da. Ombo nam da wang de nam se. Junga nam je rang xin de se. Te zo junga la tene. Junga rang xin se ba se wara. Sa yi junga, me yi junga, long yi junga se ra. Junga xi se ra, junga nga se ra. Te de wa tong. Tong se, tong de ra. Ane ka wan de sa. Junga nam je rang xin de se. Junga so so te me be se. Junga sai junga me junga long junga la so ba so so rang xin tu be te me re se. Te me be. Te da ten do te me to se. Ta di mo shi lo shan tu. Ombo wang den de da ten do rang xin ji tu ba me de so ombo da ten to so ra. Ombo nam da ane wang den nam junga nam jin de bi rang xin do de na se kon junga de bu wa se. Kyu junga koran de rang xin tu ma wa so ra. Junga rang xin ke junga rang xin ke de ba da se. Junga de ba te rang xin ji tu ba yo ma re. Junga so so a se na te rang xin ji tu ba yo ma re. Te me ne te zo chok ba la te ni chuen de bu. Ne wang bo da ten to zo rang xin ji tu ba yo ma re. Te she do. O te shi kyu ne ya.
So then next, in verse 358, we turn to a refutation of inherently existent senses or sense faculties. And this comes in 3 points, refuting inherently existent senses and their objects through refuting inherently existent elements. And then there's the actual refutation of inherently existent elements. And then finally, therefore, form is not inherently existent. So beginning with then through refuting inherently existent elements, refuting the inherent existence of the sense faculties and their objects. So again, our sense faculties like our eye sense power and ear and nose and tongue and body, as well as the various objects, the kind of forms and sounds, smells, tastes, and touch. So here, someone who would assert that phenomena are, that these are sort of inherently established because the elements that compose them or that lead to them are the cause of the various sense faculties and their objects are inherently established, sort of atomically established. So they would say that earth, water, fire, wind, and we could add space, so either 4 or 5 elements, that those are inherently existent. And so therefore, the kind of senses as well as their objects are inherently existent. So the first half of the verse where it says, the sense faculties and the sense objects are thought to be composed of the 5 elements, or sort of those who would assert that they are inherently existent because they assert that the elements upon which they are based are inherently existent. But since each of the elements is unreal, as is not inherently existent each individually, or the composite of those is not inherently existent, so they are ultimately unreal. So it is the case that the sense faculties and their objects are the results of the various elements, but the elements themselves are not inherently existent, either as a composite or individually inherently existent. And so therefore, that which results from them then is as well not inherently existent.
Lo ya. Niban junga rang xin ji tu ba ka wa te ra. Niban ne se do. Tawa ka ra sa junga nam so so ta de na se. Ane pyu me be me ta jo. Junga te zo so rang xin ji tu pu yo na. Ane pyu me na ya ko me de tu cho gu de se go ra. Junam Susu Tatena, say, Joanam, say, Joans to Tito's Mayans, Lamndiga Merida, May Joans were a condition. May Joada Meltos Kavachista. May Joans or Sai Joans, look at Joatis. Yeah. Junam Susu Tatena, Joan Sai Joan May Joan Lungi Joan to the Kangati, Susu Rangshinji to be Tade to Yona Sura. And the Pishin may bar meta juice. Pishin mena yani may you show grace ora. Pishin mena may trip to your mardo. Pishin said that did someone see some Jidan Jidan Tanya let the Pajushin come in a Pishin Sechora. May Parsayora. Shingdon Tagado and Kuga in a Shingdon to the chamber in the May Pachi Shashora. The Koran de made the Nyamdosal Shingda may watch a version. Shinkora Malhame sat any teaching, shing the man and make or a tegma sosara with the patience till say some doa. Till go with it. Talk about this. Junam Susu Tadana Pishin meba merta jurse. Yeah. Chidan Pishin said the Kupajushin Kampusha Shabale Pishin de Sedesera. Tanda de Meta Kuni Mochi Kasore. Kagashi chiti chiti mene chiti yomi to the meta baadenge chimre shine tongre richiwara tongre di yogura mada tongre di mene me ite yomara o tiko chikku da tinasi ya junam susu tade na pishin meba me tal jurse duna chanyi me jurde samala ya tetar ngese junam susu teme do tade ba yonase Juan to Ganga Chichil to Megubeche, Soso Rangshingi Tade to Soso Yodan Sigora, and the Pishin Mena made the Koran Soso Tadeche, Rawan to Yochogura Sigora, Pishin Mebe, Mayor Tower, Jula Ase, and Dune Soso Seni Rangshingi Meber Jurdese, and Dubachena Soso Seni Rangshingi Mede, Roa, Dubeche, Penchichil Tugiora. Tuisin Denia took your matter to coach it. They made to Rawangi to Ranshi to Yeshe Mara. Juan Lama Namla Tedarme so say. Tondako, Juan to Yena, Kari Nango Kangachibara, Rangshinki Omara, Kari or such much in Yora. Rangshinki Yosidikora, Shandalichi, Tuisin Demego Koda, Kora Rangshinki Omara, Germach in Yore. 되게 그런 민다서들의 마인게 가셔서 거래 네 당연히 봐지 따네 대쌈을 샤고 해시로 어디시구나 이렇게
So then next, we have a refutation of the inherently existent elements. And so here, this comes then in 359. And so it says, if the elements were distinct from each other, then fire could occur without fuel. But if they form a single composite, then they have no distinct defining characteristic. And this analysis applies to the remaining four elements. So here, when we talk about now there is actually a case that the fire and the fire element are slightly different. But here, when it comes to the element of fire, it's not as though we can posit a fire that exists in and of itself independently from something that it is burning, right? So when we talk about each of them having some kind of individual inherent existence that is totally inherently different from all of the others, we can't actually posit that. Like, for example, in India, they'll take dry dry wood and burn that, and we can't posit some kind of fire that exists independently of what it is burning. We can't have the element of fire without the thing that it is actually consuming. And so here, it is not the case that each exists individually in a way that it is inherently existent, but they are contingent, dependent upon one another. So the elements, the various elements, don't have this kind of inherent distinctness from each other. If that were the case, then fire could occur without fuel. So that's the first half of the verse. And then where it says, but if they form a single composite, then they have no distinct defining characteristics. So although they are contingently designated, it's not as though we can say that the sort of aggregation of them, if they're a single composite, then we wouldn't be able to posit them as having individual different characteristics. So they're not either inherently established as distinct entities that are completely and totally distinct, nor as a kind of single composite that is inherently existent, because they are contingently established, dependently established. So here, this isn't just applicable to the various elements, but all things are the same, that they are sort of fabricated, that they are something that is designated in dependence upon something else. We give a name to a collection of parts that is not that thing and say, well, this is that, but they don't exist in and of themselves in their own right. And so as one has reasoned into the element of fire, so too it is definite, it is the same for the other for the remaining elements.
Oh, yeah. Sumbasira. Then a sura shiki matuba shatera, somebody. In a sura shiki matuba shatwa. That's our caressana, the Darren Junam. Namnisoma sera. John Sosutan, Dubatla Soba to the Rashiki Meba Shetasa. Then me pena, do two mese. Then Sosu the man and it's soon Dubato de Rashiki Umara. Rewate Rashiki Mana, Sosun do the Rashiki Umara. Ah. Duba to me, ye says soon Dubate. John Soso Rashiki Me, John soon do Nichi Soba de Rashiki Mana. And tell it and suta te road a jealous over to it to the Russian young Maresura. Suja turned to term it ose, or today. You got it dosena. Ketan Joanam Sosotan Duba, Nison Russian maybe Tital Shesara, Soso Russian Yomar and Duba Russian Yomarese. They may be not Joan Soso than Duba Russian Mana, and then Duba Niji Russian Matube term it ose. Duba Niji Ranshiji Trube Termeter, and Dube Latene Chume Su Tate Rojalas or what is a Ranshiji Trube Telecha Yomares ora. And Duba Temeba Niji Suga, Ranshiji Chu Juan Sosun Duba de Soso Ranshiji Duba Ranshiji Mana. And then Duba Temeba Niji Suga Tondo Ranshiji Trube Termeter Ose, Su Ranshiji Trube Mede. Te Gun Jua, Soso Atan Dua de Ranshiki Mebe Shirsiga. Metose. Te Meba Luigi, Albertino. Yeah. Yeah. Te Meto so de Titata, Tindusa. Metos, ya Tishkuna. Niba one Yubisero. Niba te. Ya Hotishkuna. Metos teacher.
No. So then next is therefore forms are also not inherently existent. So this is in 360 wherein it reads, in both these ways the elements are unreal, either as inherently distinct individuals or a kind of composite, an inherently existent composite. So a composite formed from them, something that arises from the elements such as form, is also unreal. And since the composite is unreal, form is also ultimately unreal. So here, when it comes to, again, it is the case that the individual elements are not inherently existent. They don't have this kind of inherent existence either as sort of distinct individuals, nor a kind of composite that's already been refuted above, right? And so then the composite, or that which arises from them, for example, form and the rest of the sort of sense objects, is therefore not inherently established, is ultimately unreal as well. And so again, here, this is based upon the fact that the cause of these, the forms and so forth, is not inherently established. Again, the individual elements are not established inherently, nor is there a composite of them that is inherently established. And so I think we'll stop before the last line of the commentary, but it says that then there is no sort of cause of bodily pleasure and so forth. The things like that, like form, that create, that we take as being the cause of our pleasure, then are not inherently existent.
This one. Tadimendo, Niba ne setero. Ta John so tadena, Pishe maybe Mertager. Did this one.
Nare.
Did this one. Did we?
Di drosason. Nipa di dewa senipe ngogo gakpa dirwa.
Oh, yeah. Niba search, oh, me, all of those. Yeah. Niba, oh, Niba. Dewa Ransengi. Dirwa. Niba. Dewa Ransenbe ngo kabase. That's such a so dewa tungesete. Ransembas. Ransense de Ranga Changi Druba Kaucha del Sigo Marada. One trane Lomba Samato, one Lomba Samato be Tawangone Sike Medusa atandara Ransembasere. One ke ma research. Niba. Dewa Ransenbe ngo kabane. Sora Namshedan, Dushidan, Duchi. 다 렌직도 중에 랑신기 여도 신했다. 뭐 마와서라. 랑신기 여가 켈랭게 속에 라 가르식도스나. 먼저 파카에 때와랑 제바가 위어라. 뒤에서 렌장게 뭐라 랑신도 마와서라. 서로다 남시다 두시다 두시기 풍불어서 버텨서 렌직도 중에 랑신기 여도 신하사. 그저 참마데 레지도 좀 냠도살이 요청을 해서라 소라다 란드시다 소라다 남신도지 도지기 풍부해서 봐 그래서 렌지도 줘봐 랑신기 여도시네 렌지도 줘봐 랑신기 줘봐 여도세 세나세요라 뭐뭐 랑신기도 여래세 다들 봐 가고시네 남시 소르단 두시다세 남바시베서 소아세 두시세데 조지 본부 소야 본부 두시 본부 두시 본부래 셴베 본부들은 두시 본부시바 두시 본부실레 셴세 남자 탐제도 소소단이 되면서 담배던도 되면서 소소아 매베시나 네 담발이야도 참아요 말에 세리시로 대외 소라 담배 때도 랑신지 주베 때매도세 소아 대와세도 담발에 랑신지 주베시 요 말에세 남시기 풍부다세 소라다 두시다 두시기 풍부 남자 풍부 현다도자 로 담제가 담제 두시 남자 담제도 되바 랑신지 마주치 소초바데 랑신지 주고 말해 소소와야 당니 지주베 때메데 저 소소와스네 랑시 주고 말해 저 소소와 랑시 주면은 저 뒤뒤 냠도 소소나 뒤바데 랑시 주고 teleke 말와 메베치로사 야 어디시구나
So then next is in verse 3. 61. And so we get to a refutation of the sort of entity of real pleasure. And so here, where it's saying real pleasure, this is not the kind of existence by means of its own characteristics, as in when we apply that to the object of negation, but pleasure, like as in sort of real within the world pleasure. And so here it says then, again, those that are sort of realists who would assert that the various aggregates and so forth are inherently existent, they say, well, feeling and consciousness, discrimination, compositional factors, as they arise together, they are then inherently existent. And so here it says consciousness, feeling, discrimination, and volitional factors individually in no way have ultimate essence. Therefore, they are ultimately unreal. So again, it's when we have established that form, which was what was refuted above, is not inherently existent, and so too, then when it comes to the other sort of five of the five aggregates, the other four of the five aggregates, our consciousness, feeling, discrimination, and volitional factors, those kinds of volitional factors being those which don't fit into the other of the four aggregates, they don't have any kind of individual inherent existence, right? So our sort of feelings of pleasure is not something that is inherently existent, nor is the aggregate of consciousness, feeling, discrimination, and volitional factors. It's not as though the kind of aggregation, the coming together of those could be something that is inherently existent. They're not individually inherently existent or sort of ultimately real in their own right. And so too, it is not the case that then the aggregation of those is something that is established inherently in and of itself or in its own right. So then, second is a refutation of inherently existing pain. And so this comes in 362, wherein it says that, again, having already refuted the kind of idea that the coming together of sort of an object of our senses and or an object and our senses, that the meeting of that could establish some kind of real pleasure, and then that the absence of that would mean that there is some sort of an inherently existent pain. This too is being refuted here in the verse, wherein it says that what one presumes is pleasure is actually a reduction in pain, right? So when we think about what is designated as pleasurable is just really a reduction in pain. And likewise, the suppression of pleasure is what one presumes to be pain, or sort of inflated, or we sort of place upon that this idea of that being pain. But again, that pain is is not inherently existent in the same way that our pleasure is not inherently existent. These are phenomena that are merely contingent or dependent upon one another.
Oh, yeah, that is. That's there, Tunge Chirchulase. Tunge to Nuruchi make up the Leasura. And it went to Shiki or Richard, Koe subject. So I was a mancha in the raw. Chidar Tunge Chirchula, turned to Tewaranga Geshe. Tunge de to Chunrichinsuna, and it Tevanga Geshe race, that Yabuchon some. They were longer than a Geshe, not a longer a Kuramba, Yabuchon some. Tunge de Chunrichin Battalion. Kasanga the Pech and Tale Dosa. Pumbegan to the kid and Pumbe Yebegan Mambo Nasona, the Jodi Tsukesona, those young bushes at the end to see Otayabuchon Samsa, the Shiriskigra. They would dinner come here, but in your chins and the end to see Keramato. Dinner yet go to Sarwa, or Tinashisiora. To make the children do a capsule the end to see to Sera. The old man, no drossonet to me to see to say. To me, Ransembachi. Gawara Sembachi of Maris or Coaba, Tome said. Oh, Chidar Tongi Chirchula, Tondo, Teoranga Yeshi, Yalomba some days said. Tishi Tenjum Turvala, Teapa, Shambutaba, Nuru Chensona, so seminal, Tewatore, Tewataba, Nuru Chensona, Tumegi, Soraki Resivara. Tomedo Yanga Yeshi, Tomedo Lomgi or Resa. Temadoko Ranzembachi, Tewara Zembachida. Tewe Judy Delirishoria. Coaba Tewe Judy Tagadena, Tewati Tagade Medusore, Tumedi Dugara. Tumedi Yang Tumedi to Judy Tagadesona, Tumedi Tumeraj and David Usigara. Oh, Kikabashida. Chichidin Daurido. Gorich Nagin and God Nasa to Tata, but to me Degra. Go Nani Atrasona. The Vendu Shigira, Tagin Nasa Shukshimutan, that sources, the Vendu Shigira. Tete Juina Tavara, the Tete Marato, Jason, the Veso Umara, the Judith Tagin Gonagi Omare, Judith Tagateora. Oh, yeah. Chidar Tungi, Chirchu, Soa Tungi, Chungse, Shukchung, and Negabla, Tundo Tese, Tondalia, Ransembe, Tavaranga, Chechibatation, Dose. Tewa. Jomshe Munjur Chungseja, Mebara, Churwala, Ranshinji Drube, Tunge Toyanga Jecheber Seje, Ranshinji Drube Tunge, Chungseja Mede, Teshe some to Sebe Shiro, Chikchile Tene, Samlutanda Tende, Waki Kochi Yonde Tomato, Ranshinji Drube Tishi, Mendoa Seora. Ya Tishkuna.
Mm. So here, sticking with verse 362, when we have sort of fixed or alleviated our suffering to a certain degree, then we think of that as being pleasure, right? We sort of inflate that as being, or we presume, one could say, that that is pleasure. So this is really how we experience contaminated worldly pleasures, that we have a sense of, oh yeah, this is really pleasurable, but when it is in actuality just a kind of reduction temporarily in pain, in suffering that we are experiencing. And so we've given examples before, like if you're carrying something for a really long time on your right shoulder or your left shoulder, whichever it may be, and you switch it to the other one, it feels like, oh yeah, that's relief, that's pleasurable. But it isn't actually a kind of real pleasure. It's just a reduction in the pain, in the suffering that we are feeling. And so too, when we experience some kind of reduction in our pleasure, then we designate that as being painful, right? But there isn't any inherently existent pain. Now, there is something, a slight difference in that when we rely upon certain causes, again, that reduce our suffering temporarily, we think of that as being pleasurable. But it isn't as though the more that we sort of indulge in that particular cause, it's going to always be pleasurable. Eventually, it will turn turn to suffering. Whereas when it's something that is suffering, like when we have a headache, it's not at a certain point of having that headache, it will become pleasurable in the same way that that it is for pleasure. But rather, it is the case that as long as we have that headache, we're suffering, right? But if we rely upon something that we think is a cause of pleasure and continue to rely upon that, it won't continue to be pleasure. And so here there's that difference, but there is the similarity that neither of these are inherently established. We only are able to posit pleasure as in a reduction of pain, and so too pain as a reduction of pleasure. That these are not these are not phenomena that are inherently established in the slightest, but rather are merely contingent phenomena. They are contingently established upon one another.
Oh yeah. That's somebody got into it. Rangune truba, rangshinji truba, kaswa. Yu dang wangbu dang tetu. Oh. Ta tin trebu de le ni si ti she do. Trebu kabin trebu de ni. Tuni tokba trelam do temba. Tongba ni tokbe loti. Ane koe dongele tre lam re se gora. Trelam se tera. Koe tsawa de rangune truba, rangshinji truba. Ta rangshinji truba. Ta don si basira. Ta rangshinji truba. Dakiwa rangshinji truba sera. Da che kanga rangshinji truba te koe tsawa chi gora. Ti nane ta de. Dangzin di tso chi gora. Ti indi ko ka sura. Tungi tobe lo de. Chawar tenpa. Chwe lam. Koa le chwe chi ki lam. Ya tungi le chwe chi ki lam. Nyamu le chwe chi ki lam. Koe chui tso nyamu. Chakdang la soba nyamu le chwe chi ki lam. Kanga kare ni chi gora. Sumbala debula nyi sherwa. Tungi tobe. Chawar tenpa tas. Tungi tobe la tene. Koe tungi le chwe chwe sti shegara. Tungi tobe yujen ji lo mwe so. Tungi tobe lo te yujen di kanda chil shigare ti mwe so kudwa. Ta tambu tungi tobe tungi tobe sunane koe le chwe sti ten kudwa. Tungi tobe ane chawar tenpa wasa. Ti tsawa di kardwa sina. Tetara ngo nyi me chiri gira. Tetara ngir tatara shikba ngire. Tetara ngo nyi me beshi. Rangu ne truba ngo nyi me beshi. Yudang wangbu tanga rwa namshila soba te samakanga. Rangu ne truba rangi ngo yomare. Ngo me sete. Chitang ko ngo tsamta yungra. Rangu ne truba ngo me se. Tetara ngo nyi me chiri se. Tetang trebe seba tanga shira. Tetang trebe seba tanga. Tawala soba te tsudang trebe seba tanga. Tunge trebe seba ponse. Tunge da tawala seba niga yungura. Tawa yene ko kangeri chin chungri chin suna, tawa sosuna tela seba kiwara. Tunge da tawala. Ngo nye me karishari. Tetara ngo nye me shi rangshin chitube ngo mebe shi na. Tetang trebe seba tanga. Tawa kange chi nyuru chi ne te kabli ane tawa samlum ki wara. Teli ane seba de tendu wara. Tetang trebe seba tanga. Tawa tang trebe la seba yungura. Tunge trebe seba ponsi. Tunge kange ri chi ne te tozi nyuru chi suna. Ta yabu chung su samya te yungura. Tunge trebe seba ponsi. Tongbo ni to suna te seba de ponti uri se. Tiche tedar tonga chölu se. O tende tong suna ne, nyamu le chö ne kwa le chö tukure se. Ngar sheba tedar, sipa yu dan sheba ngo nye je chuba meba te shir se. Korwa tanga tene te yu wangbo tanga su la soba tanga tezu tama rangshin je chuba meba shir se. Ngar sheba tedar, sipa yu dan sheba ngo nye je chuba meba shir. Rangshin je tongbe ten, Ranshingi Trube, Ranshingi Tombe Tun, Kombar Chebale, Soa Dewa Dan Chebe, Sebada, Soa Dewa La Sebe, Sebado Durese. Tunge Dan Tewa de Ko, Dewa de To Chunru Chimbalia, Tunge da Tewa, Mari Martindi. Dewa Dan Chebe, Sebada, Tunge da Tewa La Seba, Tewa La Seba, Tunge da Tewa La Seba. Seba Pangbe, Seba Pangbe, Le Meso. Or Seba Mena, Seba Wangi Le Sagmarwa. Chakbe Wangi Kawata Mikiwe Le Sagmarwa. Chakbe Wangi Kawata Mikiwe Le Masana. And a call to Kue Kusagi Omara. Seba Pangbe, Le Meso, Mesoche, Koale to Anjua teacher. Tanda Kochi Rangshingi Tuba, Yito Wata Mewarwa. Yido wata mewa rangshingi tuba yido ni chadangi di jigi wara. Chadangi di jigi za chakbe yido tobe ta, mdebe yido tore tondala di le kosum ki le sagi wara. Tele deni kwa kogi wara. Tungeda trewe seba pongla. Seba pangbe le meso. Kwa kyo pensi ki le sadi ko le kanga marwa. Chakdangi wangi le sa suna pina tangi wangi te kiwe le ta saye kiwa mar mikiwe le sa wara. Chakbe wangi kiwe le sa ya yore, mikiwe le sa ya yora. Susu le shencha wangi, o ta nga yabu chen ma to, nga chi ma uba na, tungi nyonguri sambayi na. Sebe wangi ra, kiwe le sa ya yora, mikiwe chupang kiwa chutube yora. Ti chakbe wangi te sa yora, susu le shencha chi sa. O ti chakdangi wangi nyamugi kune la ni le sa suna ni kwa penchi kule do yora. Ti nyamu yonga de ko rangshin ki tuba jiba ti yosa. Ni chakbe yu rangshin ki tuba ra. Kondo sasa yu rangshin ki tuba yosa, chakdang ki samlu ti ki yora. Wale so, seba da tumya le so pang. Seba pang be le meso che kwa le tuwa ni gyue chire. Te dar tenzu tuwe ta, tamche da tuwa tongwa le tuwa ni gyue se. Tongba nye jita, tokpa la beba se. Tanda tenzu debra chwa, tenzo, ngobo kante shi na, di samli sha ura. Kuna chashe kashe shi yo ura, chame shi chal misi re, nangbe lu che na. Su chik roba me gira, chik tangen sab shi yo mara. Ngobo kashe shi so na ma to, ngobo kura ngobo tuwe yo mara. Cha dan cheba gugu yara. Cha kashe ro che, tele mingi ta ane tokbe wange, tangen shi ta ane sha gu yara. Ti ma to yo mara. Ina nga razi ti samgi mara. Yu korang ngune, rangshin ki yido wa ina yido wa chi chakbe yu. Yido ma wa ina tangwe tachi ina ko meka sachi, yu rangune meka sachi. Susu semgi suwa di tenro chik marwa. Susu semgi toza keche shedan drima dridan, lega chedan drima di chigi, trata nye suwa ni shenja chigi yu di samgi marwa. Yu korang ki chi ngune chi che samsa tengira. O tisi yora. O gawa le susuna. Tanda tishe giba. Chadang wangi le sa sun ne kwa pensi le re se. Chadang wangi le sa me na ne kwa ke yo mara. Kyo thoma me ba ne sa sha be chadang wangi le ma bu yu ne kepsan ten do ta. Seba de pa na ne yu na ko me to ke ge so de yu na ko chu che me ne ke ro chi mara. So yu na ke peng mara sal sa kan bu na sha sha ne ko ki mara. Tina se seba de me na Keva seba da kuwa lemba si kora. Ti mena ane kyo wala yo mare. Seba da pangu yara. Oh, ti so. Pam kuwa le so ta. Seba pambe le me so. Chin. Kuwa le chuan kiwa ti sire. Te dara. Tinjun trebe ta. Keda trebe. Tongwe. Keda trebe tongwe. Tongwa le trebe kiwe. Tongi ki ten tokwa le bebar shaos. Oh, ta tongda ko. Trebe ta keda risto nga zu tawa shirab ta tindre kapsi yungi wa. Kanki tenshi treba risto kakwa meba, ke meba, sheba meba, ta meba, wa meba do. hade de mete de troba ni shi se wo shi den ba se de sung la den da dong ba ni ya bu to so ne de to ba le de ne dang jin le so ba de pa ne ko le de do yo da wo de shi tu na
So then next, beginning with verse 363, we have the kind of result of that refutation. And this then is taught in two parts, the liberation that occurs through realizing emptiness and then identifying the mind realizing emptiness. And so here, when we are talking about this kind of path to freedom, it's the path to freedom from our afflictions, the freedom from suffering, the freedom from samsara. And when we have this kind of grasping at the self as inherently existent and then the mind as inherently existent and so forth, we give rise to attachment and aversion, and in turn create karma that leads us to continue to take rebirth within samsara. And so here, by getting rid of that kind of grasping, that base, the grasping at a self, it then eliminates all of the kind of suffering and afflictions that come from that and the repeated rebirth within samsara. And so here, by coming to this kind of recognition as it describes in this verse 363, that, as it says, since they are essenceless, one eliminates the craving to obtain pleasure and the craving to avoid pain. Thus, those who see thus attain liberation thereby. So we have this kind of, again, grasping at a phenomena, the objects of our senses, the senses themselves, as being inherently existent. But when we come to see that they are essenceless, that they are not inherently established, and really get rid of this kind of craving. We have a sort of craving to meet with pleasure and a craving to be freed from suffering. And again, we are really sort of projecting or exaggerating onto a situation in which our pain is slightly reduced, and we hold that as being pleasure, right? And we want to meet with that. We crave to meet with that. And so too, when we experience some kind of reduction in our pleasure, we crave the being separated from that suffering that occurs as a result. And so here, in order to be freed from the kind of repeated cycle of rebirth, by getting rid of this kind of craving, by abandoning that craving, both for meeting with pleasure and for being freed from suffering, then one no longer accumulates karma, and in turn is thereby freed from samsara, freed from our afflictions, and thereby freed from samsara. And again, we sort of exaggerate or presume that when there is a reduction in our suffering, that that is pleasurable, and we cling to that as pleasure. And when we have a kind of situation in which our pleasure is reduced, we cling to that as being suffering, or really crave for that to be eliminated, for us to be separated from that. And if we don't have that kind of clinging, that grasping, and this is really the kind of eighth link within the 12 links of dependent origination, then we will no longer take rebirth within samsara. We're not continuing to accumulate the kind of causes for such a rebirth. And it's really from this kind of viewing certain objects as pleasurable, as the objects of our attachment, and others as the objects of our aversion, that we then engage in various karmas that propel us to take rebirth within samsara. Now, karma that propels rebirth within samsara, when we are motivated by aversion and hatred, then we only are going to accumulate non-virtuous actions that in turn lead to a lower rebirth, a bad rebirth. Whereas out of attachment to ourselves and wanting pleasure for ourselves, we engage in virtue that then acts as a karma that propels us into a kind of a positive rebirth, a better rebirth. But it is that holding to inherent existence that in turn leads us to accumulate karma. And so there is, again, this process by which we have something that has parts. parts, right? There is a whole that is based upon parts. There's nothing that exists sort of in solitude, free from any sort of parts. And independent upon that collection of parts, we designate with a particular label. Oh, this is this. And we see it as though there is something that exists from its own side, independent of our mentally labeling, like this whole that exists without depending upon the parts, and also something that is independent upon our labeling this. And so again, we think like, oh, this person is bad or is my enemy from their own side. It has nothing to do with the way that I'm thinking about it, when really we think of people as being our friends or our enemies based upon whether they do things that accord with our mind and our way of thinking, or whether they do something that does not. And so it is through this kind of elimination of that grasping at a self, grasping at things as though they existed in and of their own right, that we are able to eliminate all of the kind of things that come out of that, our afflictions, and then the kind of karma that we create. And so it is by getting rid of this craving in particular that is the factor that acts to nurture or ripen those karmas that propel further rebirth, that we are able to end this sort of cycle. So here, as it explains in the commentary to this, that one becomes sort of seeing the kind of freedom from any sort of extremes. This is like it is said in Nagarjuna's homage, beginning the fundamental verses on wisdom, that says, to him who taught that things arise dependently, not coming, not ceasing, not arising, not annihilated, nor yet permanent, not coming, not departing, not different, not the same, the stilling of all thought and perfect peace, to him the best of teachers, the perfect Buddha, I bow down. So it is through that recognition of dependent origination that stills, that gets rid of all of our thoughts, in particular this kind of craving, that we are able to attain freedom. And it is to our profit, right, to be able to eliminate that kind of craving, because it is the fact that through the elimination of that craving, no matter how much karma we have accumulated in the past, that karma will become like seeds that aren't able to bring forth a sprout because they aren't actually planted. They don't have the conditions for that. So no matter how much karma we may have accumulated in the past, by eliminating our craving, we are then able to make that karma like seeds without water, and thereby eliminate any sort of further rebirth based upon that. And so therefore, one should make an effort to realize the meaning of emptiness.
뭐야. 뭐 다던다 그 텐제 디피케이션 붙여요나. 남부 산제 붙여나. 교단 견라 텐제 데버를 좋아. 덕시다 독실라 텐제 데버를 좋아. 텐제들 코야 뒤제네 코야 계획선에 교단 견라 텐제 데르니 중고도. 텐데 코 라와도 주바 랑신 교화신 거 말아. 디나신네 라기 뭐 샤도서 차셰도 솔라 텐제 늘로파 따니 그거 티샤고요라. 인도 랑원에 주베 랑기 공용고 말아. 랑기 뭐 주베 땅이 튀고 말아. 다음에 봐세. 랑와도 주베 땅이 매봐 쳐가리네. 디인도 그 텐데데 패키지 붙이고라. 근데 텐데데 다 거지. 라. 아니 지대 제바볼에 소버셔다 딱배 준 거지. 딱배 주 컨디션에 용고 말해서 방법이어라. 교인의 고민다 바시고 얼마다 딱바게 주치하시오 말해서 교코란 주하시는 제분이 주한도 하시고 요라. 그래서 당바그치 멘데바 상마 따왕에 바상만 고치데 텐데기 고토 요시거라. 저는 남샤 샤야 상마 미다바다 동에 와다 동반이세 또 상마데 대진데버를 좋아서도 샤도 요라. 다가네시 람곰니야 고네 고도 페야요 봐. 빠져 밑에서 빠야 여바데 고 떼진 데버를 좋아서 생각도 거라. 떼진 데버를 좋아 매나 라운에 두바랑시 두바 딱 받는데 소주 땅에게 오마라. 소에게 오마라 코나 다가 되되를 맞지. 어디인데서 시당이 집에 송반하시. 남바산지 덤바산지 좀 된데 떼진 데버를 좋아 예배 뒤에 탐제 메다 봐. 떼진 데버를 좋아 예배 쳐 탐제 동시 다음에 봐. 그래서 송바트서 기차내는 덤발가 남매가 Kashi sushi sungpa kenda tenpa lana mes. Tende tokpe kempa de kempa lana meba. Ten jen drebara juwa sido rangwene drupe tongpa de nyamdo yungu wara. Te kempa lana meba resa wara. Te tengengi tenpa de tenpa lana meba yesa. Sanje chumden de la tenpa lana meba se. Tenpa shenda chum sungi mambu yora. Tenpa yunaya tende sungi omara. Te sungta te sungpa chana misege. Ne tenpa kebar chare ese. Nangba te tende de pe kachim shagora. Gombo ludu geta ana shisungudwa. Tenjen drebara juwa ka tene tongpa nyi de shese. Dakshila tenjen, tetan drene le pa ta ne chwe te ngo shago yora. Te sonza rangwa de truwe tongpa yo ma re se ora. Tenjen drebara juwa tene tongpa nyi. Ta na me ribe se me mar ta se ra. Tene takpa te teni ume la. Dakshita chashila tene le pa takpa tsamle ya. Yu de chawa chiba de shago re se. Te sonza chebe tali se ora. Sawa ne me ma re se. Rangwane trubade meza, takwe tali chewara, rangwe tangi trubade yuwa marese, takshe tangi te tre yu sungudwa. O te sunda tende de peke shimba yense, sawa shiribla soba, te zuko temba sanje chumdende ngombulu du tuya de, tende sungba chana maha tuyo reshere, te kara sen tende de peke shimba sonsa, te chane tuya yu sungudwa. O te chila nande.
So here, as it says in the commentary, then that it's really those who see thus attain liberation, and this really refers to seeing dependent origination that is free from all sort of extremes of elaboration. And so here, dependent origination is asserted to be incredibly important. You know, there's different levels of dependent origination. All compounded phenomena are arisen from causes and conditions. There's no inherent arising because of the fact that there is this dependency upon causes and conditions. And so too, there is a dependency in the sense of being dependent upon this mental labeling. And so too, when it comes to things, they are dependent upon their various parts, right? There is a kind of relationship between the whole and the parts that we can't posit. There's no sort of self-existent whole that exists in and of itself with its own essence because it is dependent upon various parts. And so here it is the case that this kind of assertion of dependent origination is able to eliminate the kind of wrong views of outsiders, particularly like the assertion of some kind of permanent cause or a creator. It is through dependent origination that those sorts of wrong views can be eliminated. How could there be a permanent cause? What kind of result could that produce? And so forth. And it is through dependent origination and the assertion of dependent origination that those sorts of wrong views are eliminated. And so too, it is the case that the kind of positive suppositions that the Buddha has made, like impermanence and emptiness and selflessness, can be established through dependent origination. And so it is the case that those kinds of truths are something that is positively established through an understanding of dependent origination. And so too, it is dependent origination and the fact of dependent origination that means that we can actually develop our mind in the sense of eliminating all faults and developing all good qualities. This is something that is possible because phenomena are dependently originated. And so here, this is, you know, we see this in the kind of praise of Je Lama Tsongkhapa, praising the Buddha for his teaching of dependent origination as being like an unexcelled speaker because of the kind of assertions of phenomena as being dependently originated. And this really is, you know, based upon the teachings of Nagarjuna, in where he explains that whatever is dependently arisen, that has been explained as empty. And so here, whatever it is that is dependently arisen, we can't assert that it has some sort of essence in and of itself, that it is established objectively from its own side. But it's not that it's non-existent. In dependence upon something else, it is imputed as existent. So there is this level of dependent designation, and that is the middle way indeed. And so it is through the kind of, Nagarjuna himself in the root verses on the middle way repeatedly praises dependent origination, because again, this is something that is so centrally important in terms of coming to a proper understanding of emptiness that is free from the two extremes, in terms of eliminating the kind of wrong views of outsiders that make assertions that are to be refuted, and in terms of the kind of actual development of our own mind. The possibility of developing qualities and eliminating faults is based upon this understand that things are the reality of dependent origination. And so here, when we bring up this idea of dependent origination, it's something that is absolutely crucial in various ways.
Oh, yeah. Oh, didn't matter. Yeah. Oh, and that's also. It's also Shashana.
No.
Yeah.
So we are out of time for today, so we will have to leave it there.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Ginla. Thank you very much, Tujiche. And thank you, Katrina, for your beautiful translations today. We'll finish with some dedication prayers.
May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and those spiritual friends who practice it have long life. May I pacify completely all our inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of the sun's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Idam Guru Ratnamandala Punyayatayami. Due to this merit may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that form have no decline, but increase forevermore.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, tuche na gela.
Mm.
Recording stop.